And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Thursday morning's flying weather graphic looks something like this. Lots of IFR again out over the Bering Sea, pushing in to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, up into the Seward Peninsula. More IFR along and south of the western Brooks Range here. IFR mostly off the Arctic coast up there, and IFR covering the Aleutians and most of the Bering Sea. VFR, Kodiak Island, into the Gulf of Alaska, northward here through the interior, and some IFR still over areas of the southeast coast. For the afternoon, again, the westerly flow pushing moisture and marginal VFR conditions right into the central interior, even farther to the east here over the Brooks Range, with marginal VFR out to the Arctic coast. And marginal VFR for the North Gulf Coast here, improving over the Panhandle with some VFR, as you can see, developing down south. Stays VFR Kodiak Island up into at least the southern Kuskokwim Valley, King Salmon, and across Cook Inlet. Marginal VFR, though, into Prince William Sound and possibly developing over the Talkeetna Mountains there, and maybe even in toward Girdwood in the afternoon, kind of right on the edge there. And IFR here retreating back a little bit right along the north coast of the Yukon Delta, marginal for the Seward Peninsula, and eastern Aleutians, marginal VFR. Then for the day Friday morning, IFR pretty much holding steady out here near Nikolsky, but on Alaska, marginal IFR northward to St. Lawrence Island, and mostly off the Yukon Delta coast there. It's marginal VFR over the interior now. More clouds coming in, and a little bit farther south, so we've got some lower conditions here along the Alaska Range. IFR Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, a little bit IFR here along the Brooks Range, mostly on the central and east side. And some IFR over the Gulf of Alaska, but the southeast coast, not too bad. Some marginal VFR mainly in the north. For the afternoon, VFR from Dixon Entrance up into Glacier Bay for the Panhandle. Marginal VFR for the North Gulf Coast, again into Prince William Sound, maybe Resurrection Bay, and then kind of breaking up over the Copper River Basin area, but pretty solid here in the central interior back out to the Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound, and then VFR to the north there until you get to the central Arctic coast or over the eastern Brooks Range area. And not much change out west here. IFR, St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, the Pribilofs, all of the Aleutians. And for passes, Brooks Range, Anaktuvik and Adigan, marginal VFR at times, or probably mostly marginal for tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR. Rainy, VFR becoming marginal VFR as moisture clouds and lower ceilings moving from the west-northwest. And that same pattern also for windy, becoming marginal at some point in the day tomorrow. Isabel, though, far enough east, staying VFR, although you see an increase in the clouds. And Mentesta hopefully stays VFR. Tanita going for a VFR day tomorrow. And for Portage, marginal VFR. Chilkoot and White also looking a little marginal. Freezing levels here at about 6,000 to 8,000 feet over the interior. 6,000 feet as that cold pool finally shifts on in toward British Columbia over the Panhandle. And out to the west, much warmer air, 16,000 feet here over the western Aleutians, 8,000 feet up to St. Lawrence Island, then really dropping off 2,000 feet there along the western Arctic coast. And for icing, all that moisture sliding in brings considerable moderate rime icing to a rather large area tomorrow, at least a possibility of it. Eastern Arctic coast, across the Brooks Range, right on down into the Alaska Range there, and then extending out to Norton Sound. And for the jet stream here, good westerly flow here coming out of the Russian Far East up to 95 knots into the Bering Strait. Then it kind of splits right through here with a 70-knot branch dropping southeastward here across the Kuskokwim Valley. Another branch heading off to the northeast over the eastern Arctic coast. 70-knot westerlies out over the just north of the Aleutians. And then southwest winds at about 85 knots into the southern southeast coast. 9,000 feet, much lighter and more variable winds under basically high pressure at this elevation for the southeast coast across the Gulf and down toward Kodiak. Southern Bering Sea pretty light. Stronger winds up here, westerlies, 35 to 45 knots in the interior. And a little bit stronger winds out here to the west over the western Aleutians, up to 50 knots out of the west. And then for about 3,000 feet, low pressure, pretty sharp trough actually right through here. On the west side of that, northwest winds 45 knots, and the east side, south becoming southwest, 30 to 40 knots here into the southwest coast, continuing off to the northeast there at about 30 to 35 knots. Otherwise, light winds under high pressure to the south of that wind field. And for turbulence, looking for a possible considerable moderate turbulence here along the lower Yukon River areas out to the Nulato Hills, otherwise light to isolated moderate from up there toward Arctic Village, Porcupine River, all the way out to Nunivak Island, down to the eastern Aleutians, across the Pribilofs, and then possibly maybe a little bit of considerable moderate out over the west central Aleutians.